All right. Greetings and welcome back once again. This is Amuna, and I pray everybody is doing well. Welcome to the conversation. Yes, indeed. Today's conversation, welcome to those who have just joined us. It's going to be a topic that um, many people I know right now and loved ones and myself just have come into uh, this space that you know of people losing people at this time, who have lost people, or it could have been years ago, right? And they are still struggling with grief and loss. And partly, I think part of this is because of the conversation that is or maybe is not happening around this topic. And so I kind of wanted to talk about it a little bit today, and prayerfully, like many of the things that I do, it is going to be helpful to somebody somewhere, right? It may not be today, and greetings and welcome to those who just joined us. It may not be tomorrow, or it may be today. Somebody needed to hear whatever is about to be said. So with that, I pray that the words of my heart, the words of my mouth, and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in the sight of the Creator. So this is a serious topic, one that I have had experience with, right? And I wanted to talk about. Hold on one second. Let me get my glasses. My computer spectacles, right? You know, there's a lot of things that culturally we, the people, uh, have lost a handle on as well. And I think this is one of them. Okay. And I'm going to share a little personal experience as well as some information. Okay. And so, based on the historical record, right? Birth, grief, marriage, relationships have all been touched by the experience, by the trauma of the experience, right? And so, oftentimes in antiquity, not so long ago, in the land of the diaspora, people who lost loved ones, melanated people, people of the diaspora, didn't always have the means, didn't always have the time, did not necessarily always have the permission to go through the full grieving process. Today, they will tell you there is a grief process, and that, you know, these are the 5 stages of grief, which we're going to touch on. But because of the way that we are positioned in society, because of the let's go, you know, that happened yesterday, let's get back on track. What often ends up happening is everybody may acknowledge, everybody may be in shock, that you rally around the people, and then all of a sudden everybody disappears, right? And then the person or people are left with their own sadness, their own grief, not really understanding how to move through. And in some cases, the society, after they've given you their thoughts and their feelings and their compassions, kind of, you know, move on with life and don't necessarily realize or see or know how to reach you when you're stuck in any one stage, or and when you're struggling, right? And so dealing with this, I know it's a topic that for many, it's one that and grief doesn't have to be totally death. Grief can be many of things. Grief can be lost, like you're grieving a relationship, you're grieving something traumatic that may have happened in your life. You're grieving a disappointment because something that you wanted didn't happen in your life, right? So this is Soulonomics right now. So I'm a little bit serious on this, and hopefully, like I said, pass it on to somebody who may be struggling in this area, or entering into this space. Now, allowing for conversation and an open space in which people can have these types of discussions are important. But again, like I realized over time, the people, society has a limited bandwidth for what they permit or allow before you start getting into, oh, that's still bothering you, oh, you should have gotten over that a long time ago, oh. And so we see this happening where the person continues to hold on again to any one of these stages, and then at one point or another it becomes maladaptive. It becomes they're not able to go forward and live with their life. So personally, I've dealt with grief or loss in different stages. When I was very young, the first memorable loss, and now you hear me talk about my grandfather on this platform as it relates to doing my family history, I didn't know how to deal with that loss. I was young. I don't know why I took it the way I took it, but it was like devastating. Okay. I didn't know how to, but also once the funeral passed, you don't really hear much conversation. The next one was a younger cousin, a cousin. And similarly, I took it very hard, right? So I didn't understand as a young person, I didn't have that understanding. Personally, personally, I'm still talking about myself. When I had a loss of my own child, a stillborn loss, is when I began to see grief and loss out from a different angle and from a different perspective, right? And the process during that time of that loss, what I'm speaking to you about right now is from personal experience of how people are uncomfortable. They don't know how to broach the topic. They think you're fragile. They don't know how to bring it up. They maybe talk about you, but not necessarily to you. And we, the people, are not equipped. The greater community oftentimes are not equipped to have these conversations, and people suffer in silence. What was interesting is that there was a Jewish funeral home that did the burial. And for the first time in this process, I was given some books. And when I said I was going to do this video, I remember the books because I still have them, right? They gave me books. And I was like, books? What in the world? Okay. One of the books they gave was this book right here. In Lieu of Flowers, A Conversation for the Living. Right? And they talk about grieving in this book, right? And the process of grieving, because like I said, without words, without discussion, without conversation, without feeling seen and heard, it becomes difficult. And people of all nationalities, but especially in nationalities and cultures where there's a disconnect with this process, this part of life. They gave me a book. They gave me actually 3 books, of which I'm sharing today because I'm going somewhere with this, and then we're going to talk a little bit. The next book they gave was on grief and grieving. On grief and grieving, finding the meaning of grief through the 5 stages of loss. So I have books about everything. Why? Because people around you in your immediate sphere may not have the answers that you need. Like I said, they may not be equipped to have the discussion. And it still has the internal sticker, given as a courtesy to our friends and families with the hope of making each day a bit brighter. Because these people understand that this is a process, and maybe somebody who went through it before you, who can find the words to say, can actually reach you where you are. The last book they gave me at that time was this book, Mourning and Mitzvah. Right? So they gave me books, a guided journey for walking through the mourner's path through grief to healing. We may not think it's important, or we may think that, that's not how we do. We just say, be sorry for your that, and and then expect you to just go on with life. It doesn't always happen like that. Right? Because along the way, so again, I say that to say there is information out here, because this is something that has been happening to mankind for time memorial, right? So there's information out here that can help with the process, not necessarily It helps you in the way that it can inform you. It can give word or expression to a feeling. A lot of times we the people get stuck because we don't have the vocabulary, we don't have the ability to express what we're feeling, but we're feeling it, but we just don't know how to express it, or we don't have a safe place to express it. Okay. um Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about these stages of grief and how, if we get stuck in any one of these stages, it's not a specific yes, and then 6 weeks you go through this part, and then 6 weeks you go through that part, and then after about, this amount of weeks, you should be good. It doesn't necessarily work like that, especially if you're the type of person who has any type of um pre-existing things within your personality that doesn't allow for this experience to flow through, right? So if you're the type of person who historically throughout your life don't deal with difficult feelings, if you historically throughout your life stay too long in any one thing and don't know how to get over, I can't believe the person did this, I can't believe the person did that, if you have any of these things already, then when grief happens, when this comes about, welcome to those who just joined us, it's going to make the situation worse. Why? Because that's really, the person is already predisposed to struggling with certain things. This is about mental health, emotional health, and spiritual health, right? um So the processes of grieving, for those who have just joined us, are, according to the 5 stages of grief: denial. I can't believe this is happening. I heard some news recently, and yes, you say it. It's humans are inclined to be like, I can't believe this is happening. I can't believe it. I can't believe it. I can't believe it. We just keep saying it over and over. Welcome to those who just joined us. That is where somebody's stuck, right? And it's not only, like I said, grief doesn't just, or loss is not just when someone dies. It can be in different spaces and stages of our life. Another one is anger, right? And sometimes they don't always go like in sequential order. But sometimes people get stuck in denial where they won't even admit, they won't even come to terms with the fact that something like of this nature has happened, and they'll just get stuck in denying it. See, thank you, Thousand Peaches. Welcome. I sympathize, and my thoughts and prayers are with you. She said 5 years and still grieving, right? And this is a reality because we may not have the information, or we may not have the support, or we may not have the wherewithal to be able to move through the processes, and so we get stuck. I know people who are not able to let go of the physical thing after 7 years, after 10 years, not able to let go of the clothes or the items, because that would mean that you were actually letting go, right? And so, and because it's been so long, the people around you are looking like, you good? Right? Because, like I said, when I had lost, when I had a stillborn, yeah, people first, they kind of look at you from like little like off, like, oh man, I'm sorry to hear that happen to you. But then they're kind of like, you don't know what to say, you don't know what's going to trigger the person, you don't, and depending on the person, they just want someone to sit with them, because the emotions come in waves. It depends on how things happen. Sometimes if it's a real shock, your brain literally goes into a cloud, into a fog. Like, you're moving, but you don't know how you're moving. You may move through the day, the week, the month, and everything is just like a blur. People will say you talk to them, you don't remember. You know what I mean? That's part of the process. And then when you start coming out of the fog, when you start coming out of this depends on what side of it you come out of. Were you on good terms? Say it's a person. Were you on good terms with the person? Did you say what you had to say? Do you feel like you needed to say more? All of these things, all of these factors weigh in on how and why we may be stuck in one phase or another, right? So for those who just joined us, I was sharing that what I found different when this particular community was the one who helped with the service, is that they had literature, they had suggestions, Good morning. Welcome to those who just joined us. And again, I'm reading from some of the books that I was gifted during that time on grief and grieving, in lieu of flowers, and mourning and mitzvah, a guided journal. And I found this one interesting because y'all know I like writing and journals, and it's an exercise book. It's not just, let me tell you what to do. It's an exercise book. It's a guiding journal for walking the mourner's path through grief to healing, because we're still alive. So if you allow yourself to perish or with the person who passed on, then that's two people who didn't, what I'm saying? That's two people who left at one time, right? Because we have to give ourselves permission to continue on. So the next one is, and again, I am just speaking from my personal experience and sharing some of the resources that I have. Okay, bargaining is another part that comes in. If only I, what maybe if, why couldn't, that kind of bargaining, what if type of mentality, thinking that it's going to bring the person back or the thing back or the time back, but it doesn't, right? But it's the processes that people go through during grieving. Depression, a lot of people get stuck right in the space of depression. So when you say grief, it is broken down in recent times into all of these compartments, because grief would be considered the umbrella, right? Depression would stay with some people. This heaviness would stay with some people for years, as we're learning, right? Where it's still nagging, it's still gnawing, it's still ever present. You're not fully who you are. That's something to kind of examine. It's something to look at, right? And acceptance is where, like, the light at the end of the tunnel, right? What happens next? How do I take this experience and continue to move and elevate and shine and live with this opportunity that I have? This I think is important for us as the culture, for the people, because in today's space and time, there's not even enough time to grieve. And this is why I think people hold it for so long. There isn't a support in grieving, not all the time, but often. And then there's not enough time to grieve, because it's like back to whatever you got to do, back to life. Life is lifing. So you keep going and you go and you go and you go and you keep pushing it in the closet or doing whatever you do until you get to a point. And then it all comes, because it's emotions. Energy doesn't disappear, doesn't like vaporize. It transmutes. We have to take whatever we're feeling, whatever we're holding on to, and make it into something else. Transmute that energy and make it become something else, something that is beneficial. So I will speak for myself, particularly. The experience for me, because it was my own child, right? It started for me by accepting, not even accepting at first, because at first it was like in denial, right? At first it was like, and then I'm the type of person, I need answers, right? And so they didn't have any answers for me. Nobody could tell me what happened. Nobody knew. There weren't any markers. There wasn't any lead up time for you to prepare yourself, like, oh, such and such. So for me, at first, it was just like that cloud I was speaking about, like, what? I mean? And my process was difficult in that. And again, the grief is different depending on who the person is in relation to who you are, right? If it's an elder, if it's a family member, if you were close to them, all of these things determine how heavy it may be for you, or how far and long you carry it, right? And the truthfulness of it all is, in the first 2-3 months, as much as I am the type of person that I am, it was heavy. But I, in my own spirituality, kept going back to the thought of, the most I give, the most I take, and blessed be his name, right? And I tell people the truth, in a world where they're wrangling spirituality from you, wrangling your connection with the creator from you, this is what leads a lot of people, in my estimation, into this space of just floating and void, because now nothing makes sense, right? But for me, as again, personally, grounding myself in that thought and trusting that I could get to the other side of this was very, very helpful in the process. I also am somebody who throws myself into things so that I can have something to look forward to. A lot of people lose their love for life or their zest for life, and then everything becomes very mundane. So if you see Amuna is always doing something, that it's always something that, okay, tomorrow when I did get up, when I did, it's like, okay, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do that, something that tomorrow I can get up and look forward to, right? So that was just a little brief um conversation on understanding that it happens to everyone in one capacity or another. Some things linger longer than others. 100 Pieces says that you tell yourself it's your new normal. Wow. Y'all know I'll be liking to go in and ask questions. I'm trying to, as you are willing to share, I will actually share the mic if you want to share. If you want to ask, if you whatever you want to share, if you want to continue to type, you can do so. Because I would ask, at what point in this conversation do you think you're stuck? Are you in denial, anger? Are you bargaining? Are you in depression space? Or, if you've come to the acceptance, is that the new normal, by saying, you know what, this is the new normal, and that's the acceptance stage? It's important to kind of like chart where you are and see, how did you handle it? Because some people say, wow, this person is handling it so well. And sometimes it's because they didn't handle it. Sometimes it's because we didn't handle it that makes it look like we handle it so well, right? And some of the things, it takes time, but they say time heals all wounds. Not always. Time doesn't necessarily heal all wounds. It allows for the opportunity for these wounds to be healed. It is like waves. It is, absolutely, I would agree like that. Sometimes you're fine, and then the next time it'll wash in like a wave, and then it'll go back out again. So I would agree with that especially early on, it does come in waves, and early on, you don't know what may be the trigger. But again, like I said, what I found helpful is writing. Okay, so it goes between the day and what stage. So you're saying you go in and out of each of the stages. I would say what helped me is writing, finding a way, because energy and feelings and emotions are energy. Words are energy, right? So when we take what it is that we're feeling and give it, like I said, transmute it, give it space to process and to find its new beginning, then we took the opportunity to work through it. Because to be able to write or to speak like you're doing now, it's actually giving voice to it and giving an opportunity to work through it so that you can get to the other side of the experience, right? And a lot of times we may be afraid of what that means, and sometimes we get to the point where we hold on because the grief and the loss now defines us. If that makes any sense, we make that become the definition of who we are, this grief and loss, and then we become afraid to explore who we may be or who we may become beyond this, whatever it is, fill in the blank. So for those who just joined us, welcome to the conversation. If you know me, I like broaching these topics that oftentimes are brushed over. If you go through, the narratives of what happened to our foreparents in enslavement, the space and time to grieve was not given. It was like, oh yeah, that happened, get back to work. And what that did, if we talk about epigenetics, if we talk about how it reflects on those who came after, it definitely reflects. There's some social media videos that talk about, Caribbean people not taking even death seriously. It's like we're able to flow in between something so very serious and find some type of silver lining, and that's a coping mechanism. G Lazy says that she passed last October and that you're numb, and my condolences to you. It is still fresh, it's still understandable, and that numbness is a part of It's a part of the process, you know. And I pray and hope that you, uh as time goes on, you know, you have the support that you need to kind of begin to go through the process of that grief, you know, and come out on the other side of it. Queenie says, when our brothers and sisters passed, she says she gave her sister a book to write about her grief. Exactly, right? And writing about your grief, writing about your loss, writing about your relationship, writing about the benefits. Because here's something, a loss means that there had to be a gain, because you can't lose what you didn't have, right? You could lose the concept, the thoughts, but you had to have a gain. So now if you look at the gain, right? What did I gain? What was the benefit of knowing this person, of having this experience? What made me better? What made my environment better? How did, in this time that they shared in this space, because, you know, what was the benefit? And when we begin to kind of shift the narrative a little bit, it helps with coming into the phase of acceptance, because now we are able to take away from the experience something that we can continue to carry with us and make us better. Oh, that's good to hear. That's good to hear. It's good to hear that you're up now. That's good to hear. Right? So when we think about how the person helped us, what lessons they taught us, whatever it may be, especially if they're a loved one dear onto you, then it can help with the grieving process. Now, again, everybody may not be a writer, but find some type of way to make the lesson, because we all come here to learn, and we all come here to teach. It may not be in a formal setting, but our experience here in this dimension, in this 3D construct, in our earthly suit, right? It's a whole schoolhouse out here, and the process of life and death happens on a daily, in nature, in everything, in all around. It's life, death, and rebirth, and it happens on a continuum, right? And so it is a part of the process. It's not the easiest part of the process, because another thing that helped me through this, my own personal experience, is that I started wanting to understand, because that's how I make peace with things. So I started looking at elephants, and they had documentaries on how animals grieve the loss of their young. And you think it's just innately a human thing. It's not. And I see the elephant who's pregnant way beyond a human grieving. And I'm like, wow, look at nature. You know what I mean? And so you begin to understand it's not the easiest part of the human experience, but again, in it comes lessons and understanding that we can begin to continue to learn and grow from if we allow it. But if we get stuck, then now it becomes difficult. Queenie says she still loves it and glues more books to continue her story as she ages. That is beautiful. That is beautiful. That is beautiful. So I'm not going to stay too long on this, because as we see, people are in different ages and stages of this. At the end, the acceptance comes where you don't forget, because it was a part of your existence, but you don't block it out, because when you block it out, it allows the energy to get trapped. If you look at my older videos, I talk more about, you know, a lot of stuff I'm talking about now. It makes the energy get trapped, and then it becomes dysfunctional to you, the individual who's holding this energy that was supposed to move through, to get trapped in you, and then it manifests itself in all type of different ways. So I enjoy you that you keep that in mind, that if you need resources, the good thing in today's space and time, there's so many resources that can help you move through. If the immediate family, friends, and loved ones don't have the words, that you may feel like they don't understand, or you cannot relate to them, because it seems like they went over and just continue to do what they wanted to do. Also, comparing your grief to someone else's, even if you're experiencing at the same time, it doesn't mean that you're going to process it in the same way. I'm gonna read a little bit of this and then I'm gonna wind down. Let me share this with you guys, and then I'm gonna wind down. When I talk about different resources, it may not be all of what they have to say, but there may be something there that's like, oh, okay, that's helpful. So, how the 5 stages of grief can help process a loss. Okay, if you're a loved one or a loved one is dealing with loss, it can be helpful to learn more about the grieving process. This is what the whole preface that I just did is helpful to learn what your experience, give word to what you're feeling so that you know how to move, right? It says, here we share the 5 stages of grief along with a few ways to help someone who is grieving after a death or a breakup. And like I said, grief doesn't only just come with loss, like the totality, the final loss. It comes with even a breakup, even disconnecting from toxic family members, even like the generational curse breaker. That person may have to do this, but they are also grieving the loss of those relationships that they will never have anymore, right? And sometimes we're like, oh, please, you still upset about that? Get over that, this, that, and the third. Yeah, okay. It's important to remember that grieving process can be complex and it isn't the same for everyone. I just said that these steps may not be followed exactly. Like I said, it's not going to be, yes, they say I'm going to be bargaining now, and now after that, it's the time to that. It don't work like that. It don't work like that. And it isn't the same for everyone. These steps may not be followed exactly, or other feelings may surface after you thought you were through the stages of grieving. Allowing room to experience grief in your own way can help you heal after your loss. And that's really the objective. The objective is not to get stuck in the waters. The objective is to feel the emotions, learn from the experience, carry the good things, and find your way to the other side. So now you are living with the benefits of having knowing that person or having had that experience, and then you're able to touch and improve yourself and by extension the lives of those around you, right? So it's definitely not a place to get stuck if we understand that we are still here. So denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And this is also determined by personality types too. Like depression and anger are the flip sides of each other. One is external sadness and one is internal sadness. The core of anger is feeling hurt, but you project it outward, right? The core of depression is similar, but you turn it inwardly. So anger and depression are kind of the flip side of each other, in the same way that denial and acceptance are the flip side of each other. So if you imagine these are you going in one way and you coming out the other way, right? The opposite of to deny is to accept. But when somebody is denying, they're closed off, right? Their refusal, they're tight. When you're accepting something, you have to be open, right? So even on a very base, even in the very base form of this, you're getting, it doesn't have to be like all of this psychological, deep, blah, 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 blah. You could bring it down to its base form so that you can even really identify, even if it's as simple as keeping a journal of how you feel from day to day, right? Keeping a journal of, today I woke up feeling blah, 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 and such, and you know what I mean? And kind of really charting your progress from where you are each and every day to where you ending up, and seeing ways in which what may be a trigger or what things you can do to improve your environment or where you go, so that you can begin to see yourself to the other side. Let me continue here. Yo, they got 50 million. Hold on. They be trying to give you these little sneak ads here. I know y'all trying to pay the bills over here on the blogs, but why do we need so many ads? Hold on one second. I over here tried to think that, and they just flicked me off. Okay, here we are. Where are we? All right. So 5 stages of grief is a theory. Again, that's why they say you may experience other emotions because it's a theory by psychiatrist Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. It suggests that we go through 5 distinct stages after the loss of loved ones. And again, like I said, it could be after general loss too. And these stages are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and final acceptance. And as we just read, they don't have to go in that order. And bargaining is could be like, if I had gotten there 5 minutes earlier, if I had did this, if I had did this, if only this. You may hear that part of the if then scenario to try to mentally find a way to make it go back to what you want it to. But the reality is it's not going to. It's just the thing we tend to do to make sense of, or try to feel like you have some level of control over the outcome, right? Let's continue. In the first stage of grieving process, denial helps us to minimize the overwhelming pain of the loss. As we process the reality of our loss, we are also trying to survive emotional pain. It can be hard to believe we have lost an important person in our lives, especially when we may have just spoken with them the previous week or even the previous day. And that's kind of the numbing too, to a degree. That denial, it kind of like seals you off, like you don't feel it. That's what it does. That's the numbing. It kind of blocks the pain. Like, that's not, you bugging. That didn't happen, right? It kind of blocks the pain, the painkiller. So you don't have to accept this reality, like this thing is actually happening, right? During this stage in grieving, our reality has shifted completely. It can take our minds time to adjust to our new reality. We reflect on the experience we've shared with the person that we've lost, and we might find ourselves wondering how to move forward without the person in your life, right? This is a lot of information to explore and a lot of painful imagery to process. This is why I often said 101 videos, you have to process it. Emotions are meant to be felt. They become dangerous. Welcome to those, Abini, welcome to just join us. They become dangerous when we don't allow ourselves to feel. You got to be hard. Da, 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 da. You don't want to be no blah, blah, blah. When you do that, it's like causing this alcoholic, toxic mix that's fermenting. And we all know that energy that's stuck in the body can also manifest as disease. Like anger affects the liver and fear affects the kidneys. And so these things can also manifest themselves as diseases if you hold this energy in your body too long. Let's continue. So now, not being able or equipped to actually process this stuff, not only are you processing the loss of the individual or the loss of the experience or whatever, you're now also going to have to process the pain and damage that you're doing to yourself, right? It says here, what shot me there? It can take our minds time to adjust to this new reality. We reflect on the experience that we share with the person. No, I already did. Denial attempts to slow this process down and take us through it one step at a time, rather than risk the potential of feeling overwhelmed by our emotions. Denial is not only an attempt to pretend that the loss does not exist, we're also trying to absorb and understand what is happening. And again, like I said before, if it just happened really quickly, you know what I'm saying? Or if in any way, however it happened, even if you saw it coming, but it was unavoidable, then it's still hard to process, right? But you, in this stage, you have to give yourself permission to feel. If that's the most, you have to give yourself permission to feel. Because some people, if they're the rock of the family, if they're the bedrock, if they're the cornerstone, if the one that always have to together, then they don't have permission to feel, right? And then you got to go back to work and you got to go back to your family or whatever the case may, and you still don't have permission to feel. So if you don't give yourself permission to feel, male or females, and it's difficult more for men when the expectation is don't cry, be strong, this, that. Okay. If most, I gave everybody emotions. So, we could go ahead and scrap the whole men don't cry. Cause I always say if men shouldn't cry, then they wouldn't have tear ducts. Like you got tear ducts and tears come out. So you ain't walking up and down crying every day, but the reality is we all are human. Therefore we all feel. And pretending that we don't feel is very, very dangerous. Anger. The second stage is saying is grieving is anger. We are trying to adjust to a new reality and are likely experiencing extreme emotional discomfort. And for everybody, the anger doesn't manifest the same. Sometimes you have people who are aggressive. Sometimes you have people who are passive aggressive. Sometimes you have people who turn the anger inside and they damage themselves, right? So anger doesn't always look the same on everybody. That's another thing. It's not always like banging your hands and, anger doesn't always look like that. It says, we are trying to adjust to a new reality and likely experiencing extreme emotional discomfort. There's so much to process that anger may feel like it allows us an emotional outlet. And in especially males versus females, anger culturally is a more acceptable emotion for males, while sadness and depression culturally is a more acceptable emotion for females. Why? Because one, and I did the study on this many years ago, one is seen as outward facing, right? Which is the masculine energy. And the other one is turned inside, right? Which is seen as having feminine, not female, but feminine energy qualities. And so, again, this becomes dangerous when you're only given permission to feel an emotion that suits your gender, right? So if the woman becomes angry, it's like, oh, she's acting blah, blah, blah. But if the man becomes sad, then not only does he get to be sad, he has to deal with you saying he's acting like a girl or a woman because he is sad, right? And that's also why grieving in certain toxic spaces makes it worse. Let's continue. What time is it? Did I put the link in the box? I think I did. Keep in mind that anger does not require us to be vulnerable. That's what I was just speaking about. However, it may feel more socially acceptable than admitting we are scared or hurt, right? Anger allows us to immerse emotion with less fear or judgment of rejection. And again, it's more acceptable in one gender culturally than it is in the other. Don't argue with me. This is what goes on outside. Anger also tends to be the first thing we feel when starting to release emotions related to loss. This can leave us feeling isolated or in our experience. It can also cause us to be perceived as unapproachable by others in moments when we could benefit from comfort, connection, and reassurance. So if the person is looking angry and they're carrying on, greetings and welcome to those who've just joined us, then what you really need is a hug, right? But somebody may be apprehensive from hugging you because you don't look approachable, right? And so in that moment, you may need a hug, you may need connection, you may need to know somebody is there, but you are in such a space that you won't allow for it. And so it even makes you more angry. And then again, like I said, the people are not always there after the hype is gone. And so now when you really need it, no one is around. Bargaining. And I'm gonna move through here. Bargaining. When coping with loss, it isn't unusual to feel so desperate that you're willing to do anything to alleviate or minimize the pain. During this stage in grieving, you may try to bargain to change the situation, agreeing to do something in return for being relieved of the pain you feel. And that pain is on a soul level, right? Although if you notice, a lot of what is going on, even though it's emotional, it's triggered by our thoughts, right? But on a soul level, you're feeling the loss, the disconnect of that energy that was once flowing through you, and it was reciprocal going back and forth. Now it's disconnected. So you're feeling that disconnect on a soul level. And it's not something that you can like put a finger on necessarily. And so it becomes difficult to really deal with it. So I'm gonna just jump down here. So the bargaining is the if then statements, right? Really, that's what bargaining is. If you do this, then I'll do this. If you bring them back, then such and such and such. That's the bargaining stage that many people seem to find themselves in. And again, bargaining comes from a feeling of helplessness and gives us a perceived sense of control over something that feels so out of control. It feels out of your hands. So you kind of want to get control back on the situation. I'll jump down for the sake of time to depression, right? During the experience or processing of grief, there comes a time when our imagination calms down and we slowly start to look at the reality of the present situation. Bargaining no longer feels like an option, and we're faced with what is happening. In this stage of grieving, we start to feel the loss of our loved one more abundantly. Our panic begins to subside, the emotional fog begins to clear, and the loss feels more present and unavoidable, right? And in these times, you go inward. I just said sadness is connected with going internal, and anger is connected with external, right? And so, again, for some, it may be more acceptable than others, but it's acceptable for all because everybody's human. We might find ourselves retreating, being less sociable, and reaching out less to others about what we are going through, which then makes it difficult for people to help. And even still, some people don't know what to say. They don't know what to say because this conversation, this space is difficult, especially if the people who are coming into this space haven't done their own work of processing emotions. Some people just stay in the denial stage and never come out, right? And just pretend that nothing really happened. Acceptance, the last stage of the 5 stages of grief. When we come to a place of acceptance, it is not that we no longer feel the pain. Instead, we are no longer resisting the reality of our situation, and we are not struggling to make it something different. So you accept it. It is what it is at this stage. It says sadness and regret can still be present, but the emotional survival tactics of denial, bargaining, and anger are less likely to be present during this phase. And again, it's a theory because there may be other things that come up, like resentment, like indifference, like feeling abandoned, like, all of these things can fit under other umbrellas, but you may be like, you know what, I don't feel sad. What I really feel, and a lot of times the problem is that people don't know how to give the feeling the accurate description, the accurate um, definition. I'm over here saying we don't know how to give it accurate definition. I can't remember definition. We don't give it the accurate definition of what it is, right? So you may say, "Oh, I feel sad," but it's really something else. And at one point, I did a word association chart that has more vocabulary connected with the things that we usually say, like sad or upset or anger, but it's more nuanced than that, right? And once you get to what the feeling really is, then you can begin to understand why you're feeling this, right? This is just an umbrella of what one may be feeling, but it may not fully define what you're feeling. And that's where the internal work comes in. Let me put this in the box. So like I said, going through things like this alone, without the proper tools, without the proper information, without the proper support, it could be difficult. And people can begin to take up habits and behaviors that kind of self-soothe. Somebody may self-medicate, and they may drink, or they may begin to smoke, or things that are just going to literally numb you and block you out, or engage in dangerous behavior, or begin to do things. People begin to do things because they want to just make the feeling go away. But all of that is very much temporary, right? All of that is very much temporary, and it can do more harm than good in the end. So that's kind of what I wanted to share today, just to know that my heart, my thought, and my prayer is with those in this time who may be grieving, who may be in the process and kind of needed a word to be said that, hey, I see you, I hear you, and understand that this is indeed a process. But the more willing we are to work through it, I could say this. In many of I've been through or navigated a lot of difficult emotions in my life. And one thing I have to say is, although it's difficult, and although some may get you stuck in a space more than others, the willingness to go through it is the only way you're going to get to the other side. It's the only way we're gonna get to the other side. It's the willingness, whatever it may be, the willingness to move through it and be anchored in the reality that it's all good at the end of the day. And I know that sounds cliche, right? But anchored in the reality that at the end of the day, we each came here individually to have an experience. And everyone who came on our journey, either temporarily or long term, they came at a certain time, and then they had a certain time to come in and out of our lives. That's the reality of it. And we are the, for lack of a better word, main characters in our expression of this existence. You understand? Queenie, you're welcome. You're welcome. Right? And so if we recenter the conversation, like there's some people, I watched a lot of people's testimony, and because the conversation wasn't really centered, it was kind of off kilter a little bit, then the way in which you view the thing is going to, of course, is going to take you over here. But if you find your center, and begin to deal with the situation from that center, then it can change the whole way in which you're seeing things. And 100 Pieces says, thank you for helping me understand it's normal to feel as I do. And that's why I was led to have this conversation today, that it is normal. Let me drop this in the box. It's also a part of the process, and people do get stuck, right? And it is our responsibility to assess our that's one of the articles. And then again, the books that I was gifted all those many years ago, now it's like 13 years ago, right? That I was gifted when I lost someone. This helped me to realize that other cultures have these conversations so that people can at least have the tools that they need to move through. So this book was called In Lieu of Flowers. This book is called On Grief and Grieving. And this one is called Mourning and Mitzvah. And this one is a journal. Hold on one second for me. Hold on one second. Thank you for holding. So yeah, hopefully that was helpful. Because you never know what someone is going through. And I like to, when I see people, I like to look in their eyes, because we're trained to say, how are you? And the person says, I'm all right. And you ain't all right. Right? And so if we all have these very sanitized, and I mean, sometimes it gets me hemmed up, because I may stand there talking for 2 hours or listening to somebody who's just waiting for somebody to actually ask the question and wait for the answer. You know what I mean? And so we're living in a world right now that there's so much communication, yet less and less people are being heard. And I think that compromises us as a people, as a humanity, where we're just saying vain things because it's courteous. You know what I mean? We're saying vain things. We don't really mean it. We don't really want to, when my children go out with me, they be like, Mommy, I do not know. You just have a something about you where people will just start telling me and talking, and I'll just listen, because it's missing. You know what I mean? It's missing, and you don't know that, the creator had a word for you to give, and you were like, I don't got no time. Let me go ahead and let me mind my business. You know what I mean? And you were the person who was supposed to give that person a word. Like, you could have been the answered prayer, and but you were too busy, to hurry up and go watch TikToks. I mean, so, the next time you ask somebody how they're doing, actually wait to hear the real answer. And sometimes you maybe not be able to fix their problems. It may be just a listening ear. So 1,000 pieces. Thank you for tuning in, and thank you for being willing to share. And I'm glad, and I'm humbled that you were able to get some information for you to understand that these are normal processes, um, and it works differently for different people. I would say read a little bit more about it. I would say even just journal your feelings and emotions, and see whether or not there's something that, because sometimes, again, I'll say this and then I'll wind down. We get stuck because we refuse to let go. Sometimes the grieving process goes beyond because we refuse to let go. And I know that's like the denial stage. So we set up a roadblock in our mind because I wanted to do this and this and this. I didn't get to say da 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 da. If on, you know what I mean? So when you say, okay, what is stopping this? It's, for instance, pregnancy has a certain time period. You understand what I'm saying? From conception to birth. If you go too far beyond that time period, what normal becomes abnormal, right? Because now you're going beyond the time that the child is supposed to be in the womb, and now you get a whole nother host of problems, right? So think of these processes in life, as they all have a specified time. It's not, everybody's time is not the same. Some is able to move through it quicker than others because some are more willing than others to 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 make the effort, or some have the more tools than others, or some may not have been connected as others. You might be like, well, why am I feeling like this and that person is skipping? Maybe they didn't have the connection that you had, right? And the depth of the connection sometimes also determines the how long the process takes, because of how connected you were, or the state of the relationship during the time, or how much stock you put into what you thought your life could have, would have, and should have been. Yeah, man. So with that said, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to put it under the box. Be a little, I like to joke, I like to laugh, I like to do all of that. But then there comes a time that we have to learn to be gentle with ourselves and gentle with one another, because you never know what someone is really going through. You know what I mean? You never know what they're really going through. And so you could be somebody who provided some light and some warmth, or you could be, you know what I mean? We don't even want to say. So that's why I would say, try, be respectful, acknowledge one another, and just, let's keep being human, man. We're all here. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and wind down now. Everybody have a blessed day, and we will talk again. I put the link in the box, and I'll put it under this video.